Hey guys, Pie Guy here, and welcome to every episode and storyline of Fionna and Cake Season 2 Reviewed. Oh, Fionna and Cake. Fionna and Cake Season 1 was an absolute joy. A wonderful multiverse hopping show that gave Simon closure and let us see alternate versions of our favorite characters. It expanded on the miniseries format of Adventure Time to give us 10 22-minute episodes that were focused on one big epic story. There was a main antagonist and a lot of action and comedy all around. Someday I may do a full review on Season 1, but all you need to know for now is that I think it is not without its problems, but also a very good continuation of Adventure Time. So 2 years passed after Season 1 came out, and we got promos for a new season of Fionna and Cake. This time, Huntress Wizard was going to be the featured character like Simon was in the first season. The fandom was hyped because she was a character that got a bit of focus in a few episodes of Adventure Time, but the show ended before she could really become too major of a character. And of course, she is Finn's last love interest, so she's the one that everybody assumes he ends up with. People wanted to see more of that. The trailer and the promo images for the season all pointed to it being another multiverse hopping action adventure. But when the series finally started airing, that's not entirely what we got. The season has minimal usage of the multiverse. It has a greater emphasis on romance and more slice-of-life mundane storylines, and it tries to juggle many different stories as the show becomes almost an ensemble. In addition to all that, Finn is dying. Safe to say, it's pretty different from Season 1 of the show, but just because it's different doesn't automatically mean it's bad. In this video, I will be reviewing each and every episode in Fionna and Cake Season 2. Then, at the end, we will be looking at each and every storyline that continues across the season. This way, we can judge both how individual episodes are put together, as well as the bigger picture of how these stories progress across the season. So, let's get started. The Hare and the Sprout. Episode 1 does a wonderful job reminding us what happened in the first season, reintroducing these Fionna World characters, and setting up most of the plot lines that are going to happen throughout the season. In some cases, doing so economically and naturally. Things like Cake tearing down the DJ Flame posters, Marshall's mom calling him, and Hunter flirting with Fionna are all great little moments that set up the journey these characters are going to go on. For Cake's storyline, we set up how she wants to be taken seriously as a real human-ish adult and not be seen as just a cat and a shape-shifting novelty. This is done in several moments throughout the episode, such as her choosing not to eat the fish pastry, wanting to have a more humanoid body for her crush, Emkron, having a real apartment of her own, and getting freaked out by the little girl who wants to just see her as this shape-shifting plaything. For Fionna, the episode reminds us that she cannot hold a traditional job, but still wants to help people. She procrastinated getting all the things that Gary needs, but still managed to do it, showing that she is holding it together, but just barely. She also has a nightmare about killing all of her friends, because she's still messed up from the events of Season 1's The Winter King. The episode also sets up the sweet spot and shows us why the characters care so much about it. For Marshall, it's a place to park his van. For Gary, it's his dream coming true. For Ellis and Fionna, it's a place to chill and vibe. This makes it all the more impactful when Queenie tears it away from them. The flow of this episode is just fantastic, starting with Fionna waking up and then meeting up with Cake, having breakfast, running errands, bumping into characters. Then she has the phone call with Simon, and she meets up with the gang at the sweet spot where they all work together to set it up. All of this mirrors the very first episode of the first season, where she also goes about her day. And then, in the second part where they start mixing in scenes in Ooh, it feels like things build nicely between the two storylines. And speaking of Ooh, what a way to begin the season. Finn is dying of a mysterious injury that he got from the first season that we didn't know was this serious at the time. There's this mystery about the heart of the forest and what's happened to him. There's a real sense of desperation by the point at which Huntress drops Finn off with Simon. And it leads to a cliffhanger where the bear from Season 1 is sneaking up behind Huntress. Fionna World and Ooh do not feel like they are at odds with each other in this episode. It feels like they complement each other nicely. At the start, they tease that something has happened to Finn, but we don't actually find out that he's dying until halfway into the episode, which leaves a lot more focus on Fionna and her problems in her world, and it doesn't seem to be overshadowed by this bigger problem of Finn dying. And by the time things escalate in Ooh, things are also escalating in Fionna World, with this gnarly dream that Fionna has where she kills everyone. And the flow of cutting back and forth between Fionna World and Ooh feels natural. It doesn't seem like any scene is too too short or too long. They do these neat match cut transitions, clinking glasses to cut to clinking glasses, and pots and pans banging to bells chiming, anguished face to anguished face. These transitions go a long way to smooth over the fact that these are very different events happening in very different universes with little tying them together at this point. But it's not like there's nothing that ties them together because Fiona has a phone call with Simon. And the last thing I want to say is that this episode, and really the whole season, but especially this episode, has lots and lots of great callbacks and references to Adventure Time. Waffles and hot dogs being this world's version of bacon pancakes, the female Sir Slicer shows up, there's even a clamulance in the background. And I appreciate that other than Sir Slicer's female counterpart, these are downplayed and in the background. If you know the reference, great. If you don't know the reference, you're not sitting there scratching your head wondering what on earth this is about. Really, the only downside to this episode is the fact that it is all setup. Obviously, that's not going to be as entertaining or fun as the payoff or climactic moments, but you do have to spend some time setting things up, and I feel like this does a good job of being entertaining and setting up at the same time. Thankfully, the exposition feels incredibly natural. It's a good time, and sets the bar pretty high for what's to come. Episode 2, The Crocodile Who Bit a Log. This one continues the two main narrative threads from the first, Huntress trying to save Finn, and Fiona and the gang trying to save the sweet spot. Format-wise, the stories have swapped though, where the Huntress story is now the main focus of the episode, and the Fiona story only takes up a few scenes. In Fiona World, they try to take the sweet spot back by force, including a comedic fight scene between Cake and this elemental, then they mope around in a bar, then they just try to take it back by force. Again, but with a tank, before realizing they should just buy the plot of land legally. The Huntress stuff includes a really awesome anime-esque fight between Huntress and Witch Wizard, and Huntress exploring an entirely new and mysterious dimension where she gets broken up and her pieces get scattered across different universes, including some from the first season. Clearly, this is going to be the excuse that they use for the characters to go on a multiversal adventure this season, collecting up pieces of Huntress, following up the threads from last season. We're definitely gonna do that, right, guys? Anyway, the stuff happening with Huntress is very exciting, and while Fiona's storyline isn't quite as exciting, it still is a fine escalation of what happened in the first episode. I should also mention that the intro sequence in this episode, as well as the one in the first episode and several future episodes, feature flashbacks that are animated a little bit differently than the rest of the series. And it's always exciting and fun to see the artist just go wild and do something a little bit different. This one features a young Huntress practicing and training with her mind set to a single goal, getting to the object inside of a stone. Then she chooses to gain the powers of being a green mage, but rejects being a part of their culture and society. What's nice about this flashback especially is that it directly ties into the rest of the episode. We learn about how determined Huntress is to complete her goals, and how she uses the powers of a green mage, but also doesn't really identify with the rest of them. It's also cool to see Witch Wizard appear in this intro before we reveal that she was the bear that attacked Finn in the first season. The action in this episode is pretty superb. Seeing Witch Wizard transform into all of these different animals to hunt Huntress down is such a fun action set piece. Though I can't be the only one who is reminded of a different green shapeshifter who turns into tons of different animals. I just love everything about the fight, and I also love when the green wizards have to go analog and are forced to use things like daggers and bombs. And we're introduced to the undergrowth here, although we don't know that it's called that yet. It's this visually interesting dimension that provides some sort of nexus to all these other universes. And I like the ending of this episode, where Fiona's on another phone call with Simon, laying out her fears that all of her friends are going to abandon her. And between that and Huntress hearing Simon thinking she's Anu and landing in Fiona World, it really seems like they're setting up the next episode to be a big worlds collide moment. It's nice that it didn't take half the season to have these characters meet up, he says sarcastically, knowing what happens in the rest of the season. It's a good time, and my only complaint in this one is that it is starting to feel like Fiona's story is just not quite as interesting as Finn's. I like that they're starting to tie things together, but at this point they are still two separate stories, and Finn dying is obviously going to be more interesting than Fiona trying to buy a plot of land. But because it's so early in the season, it's not that big a deal. It's just the sort of thing that if they don't end up tying these stories together very well, it's going to feel like Fiona's is just not as interesting as Huntress and Finn's. Episode 3, The Lion of Embers. The first two episodes were pretty focused on Huntress trying to save Finn, and Fiona and the gang trying to save the sweet spot. Here though, we start with a fun but pretty unnecessary flashback to old Fiona Fionna and Cake. Then we bounce between Huntress as a seed, Cake trying to have a date with Emcron, Fionna flirting with Flame, and then Hunter. The princess is trying to kiss Finn back to life, Prismo hanging out with the Cosmic Owl, and we end with Big Destiny dying. There's a lot going on, and yet at the same time, it doesn't actually feel like much has happened. By the end of the episode, Huntress is still a seed, even if she's a slightly stronger seed. Cake didn't seem to have made any progress with Emcron as their date ended abruptly. The princess's kissing Finn didn't help in the slightest. It is an unsatisfying episode of television, and the only storyline that gets significant focus is Fionna and DJ Flame. I'll talk about this a lot more after we've reviewed every episode in the season, but DJ Flame is not an interesting character. He exists to be a generic, sweaty, pretty boy, and while we get some hints of more interesting things happening with Fionna psychologically that leads her to chase after Flame, on the surface, we just see her chasing after this generic nothing of a character that already dumped her prior to the season. Everything about Fiona's crash out towards the end of the episode is not good. We really need to see Fionna flirt with Flame a few more times before going this distraught upon learning that he has a girlfriend. Fionna completely snaps at Cake, gets super drunk, leads on Hunter, and is awful to them, then gets upset that Simon isn't there to listen to her whine before going on this big melodramatic, "Where's my happy ever after?" I know that the story this season is about how she's struggling to keep it all together and she's on a downward spiral, but she hits rock bottom on episode 3. The pacing is just off. As it stands, it's this big emotional outburst that doesn't feel like it's been earned yet. I'm not sympathetic for her here, I just find her pathetic and unlikable. Let's switch gears and talk about the Huntress storyline. Isn't it fun to watch a character not be able to move or do anything? Isn't that just great? It's not. It's boring and frustrating to see this character that was so action-oriented in the first 2 episodes be reduced to this. It sucks. And the fact that she doesn't even get to reform her body at the end of this episode is so unsatisfying. I don't care that she got a level up. It doesn't matter. She should have regained her form, or maybe we just shouldn't have seen her in this episode. The dream she has where the spirit warrior is giving her cryptic advice is okay, but otherwise her contribution to this episode is horrible. Then there's the Ooh crew, Simon, Marcy, and PB. Their story in this episode is that they have secured Finn and are running experiments on him, but nothing seems to be working, and then a bunch of princesses bust in and all beg to kiss Finn back to life because they're all really in love with him. I'm pretty neutral on this story. It's not given a ton of screen time, and it's fairly obvious that this plan isn't going to work, but they do get a few solid jokes in, and it is nice to see a bunch of these old princesses making cameos. If this was the B-plot in another episode, it might have been fine, but with all the different things going on in this specific episode, I feel like this story gets lost in the shuffle. Let's talk about the numerous cameos in this episode. Starting with Flame Princess. This is a character who fans have wanted to see back for a long time. She was completely absent from season 1 of Fionna and Cake, as well as all of Distant Lands. Bringing her back was definitely a good idea, especially with the storyline they're going for, with all the princesses kissing Finn. However, it does suck that she gets 2 lines, and one of them is used to tease a relationship that we don't even get a hint at who her partner is. I like the shtick where Finn is Sleeping Beauty, but the rest of it really falls flat for me. By this point, Finn hadn't been with Flame Princess in many years and many seasons of the show. Honestly, it feels like they threw this in here just to parallel what's going on with Fionna and DJ Flame. While Flame Princess gets to show up in non-speaking cameos the rest of the season, she doesn't ever actually do anything other than this one time. I don't understand why they brought the voice actress in for 2 lines in an episode. But hey, there was no more time to give her any more focus in this episode. We really had to see Huntress struggling as a seed. Very important. Another cameo is Big Destiny. He shows up to have a dream where his son kills him, and then he wakes up and his son kills him. It is very creepy, and Big Destiny is a pretty awful person, so he got what he deserved, but it just comes across as random. It wasn't like it's a dangling plot thread from the last season. No one was sitting around going, "Oh man, I wonder what happened to Big Destiny." While it's an interesting scene, there's just no real reason for this to actually be here. In the opening sequence, we see the Ice Queen as well as Flame before he becomes DJ-ified. And while it's a fun sequence that harkens back to some old Adventure Time flavor, it also feels like it doesn't need to be here. So it shows an interaction of Fiona and Flame before the world got rebooted, but it doesn't really tell us anything about their characters or their relationship. This is not the first time they've met. They seem to know each other's names. It's also kind of weird because the Ice King never kidnapped Flame Princess ever. But more to the point, I feel like this should have explained something about why these characters are the way they are and what their relationship truly is. Give us some sort of insight into something that does take up the majority of this episode. Lastly, we gotta talk about Prismo. It is lovely to see him again after he was a major character in season 1, and they even got his original voice actor back in Kumail Nanjiani. Unfortunately, he doesn't affect anything here. He just sits around in his hot tub and explains what the undergrowth is. A location that popped up last episode and won't matter again until episode 9. Using Prismo as an exposition machine is really lame. They could have explained this in any number of ways that was actually interesting, but no, he just point blank says to us and Scarab what this actually is. And like all these cameos, he gets very little screen time. While each of these scenes do have some merit, and are kind of fun in isolation, they simply do not belong in this episode that is already overstuffed with plot lines. None of these things give us insight into the characters or progress the plot. Flame Princess fails to save Finn and fails to explain who she's dating. Big Destiny was not relevant in any previous episodes this season and won't be relevant again this season. Old Fiona World was fun but literally retconned out of existence, meaning it just simply does not matter. And Prismo is off in his own little pocket dimension, giving exposition and explaining why he's not going to get involved in the plot. Any positives that these scenes have are just negated by how distracting they are in this episode that's already bursting at the seams with too many things going on, yet not enough actually progressing. It should come as no shock that I think this is a bad Adventure Time. There is an argument to be made that this episode could be a necessary evil. That even though it doesn't really work as its own episode, it is something that is crucial to the overall story of the season. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The first 2 episodes were already set up, and those did a much better job at being entertaining on top of that. And the rest of the season doesn't actually follow up on a lot of these things. And what it does follow up on, like Fiona flirting with Flame, Cake trying to get with Emkron, and Huntress as a seed, are all things we're going to see again in the upcoming episodes. So no, I can't even say that this episode was a good contribution to the overall storylines. Episode 4, The Cat Who Tipped the Box. Much like the previous episode, we are still a little bit all over the place in terms of what characters we're following, what storylines are happening, and what universe we're even in. But despite that, there are more positives than the previous episode, one of which being that the comedy is actually really good here. It's a topic I haven't talked about much because, for the most part, I feel like it's understated this season. Not that it doesn't have funny moments, it does in every episode, but they're more few and far between. And they're not really laugh-out-loud moments, but minor things that are amusing. But not in this episode. Real quick, let's list a bunch of things I found funny. The random dog taking a dump, all the jokes about Huntress being nude, getting DJ Flame's song In Your Panties, the lemon carbs kicking Fiona in the crotch. Even some of the supposedly bad jokes that the writers gave Cake on Cheers are actually pretty funny. But as far as the stories in this episode, we start off with a very beautiful and sad opening that is directly related to what happens in the rest of the episode. It's short and simple, a fairy tale-like story of how Huntress got her first family and how she lost them. It explains why she's such a loner. It also sets up how she grows by eating food, mostly meat. It's a solid way to start the episode. And then from the devastation of Huntress's adoptive family burning horribly to nothingness, we transition to Gary, Marshall, and Ellis grocery shopping. In fairness, there is an opening theme in between the 2 scenes, but still, if this doesn't illustrate the dueling identities of this show, I don't know what does. This scene is really dull and not much plot critical happens. It's the boys shopping. Gary tries to decide between 2 brands of an ingredient. Marshall gets a 3rd call from his mom and actually answers it, but he quickly hangs up and then bumps into Simone, but she runs away. He'll have to wait for next episode to see what any of that was about. Perhaps if I liked these characters more than I do, this could have been a chill hangout scene where you enjoy spending time with the guys and seeing what they do when not much is actually going on. But I think Gary and Marshall are boring this season, and this scene certainly doesn't do any favors. And they're not in the rest of the episode, so let's move on. Back in Oo, the gang puts together the Enchiridion portal and transports to where Prismo lives to see if he can wish Finn back to health, and it turns out he can't because his magic's broken. Why? I don't know. They won't explain it. Scarab interrupts Prismo before he's about to say. This is another one of those irritating teases where they refuse to even give us a little bit of information. Ever since the first season, there's been this glitching effect that seems to be associated with Prismo. So this is something we've been curious about for a while, but of course, season 2 is not interested in going into that. Being vague and leaving things open-ended certainly has its place, but in this case, I just think it's lame. Later on, Simon goes to the Ice Thing's lair to try to find the demonic wishing eye to see if that can wish Finn back to health. We get this interesting scene where Simon is confronted with an echo of who he used to be. The Ice Thing, of course, is Gunther turned by the crown into a simulacrum of the Ice King. You can tell Simon is uncomfortable with all of this, but at the same time, he tries to do right by Gunther because he is kind of sort of like his adopted son. And like a lot of things in this season, while this is an interesting and fun concept, we do not get the time to properly explore it. And I actually know from the production blog that there were scenes cut here for time, and it's so unfortunate because I would have liked to have seen more of this. Why did the grocery shopping scene stay in this episode, but Simon coming face to face with his past can't? As for the Ukrew's contribution to this episode, I feel like it could have been so much more. These characters could have tried to investigate what was going on with Prismo's powers, or done something. But no, it's all just so quick because they have to cover so many other things happening in the episode. Cake's storyline is that she gets booked to be on Cheers. We find out that the cast is actually tiny people, and they want to have Cake on because she can be tiny too and make a bunch of stretchy jokes. She gets offended by this and destroys the set, running away. Okay, so this is just weird. Fiona World is supposed to be down to earth and not magical, right? So why are there tiny people? I get that it's supposed to be like a joke, but it really undercuts Cake's storyline entirely. She's not as much of a novelty if there's just a bunch of teeny tiny people running around that are actually beloved. But putting that aside, I kind of like what they're doing here. It's very reminiscent of Jake in The Limit, where the hot dog knights push him to go past, well, the limit. Here, the audience is pushing Cake to be this dumb novelty. It's further escalating her feeling like she doesn't belong in this society. But again, all of this is undercut by the fact that these are tiny people. Also, maybe this is me missing the joke, but how is there a talent coordinator if the entire show takes place in a small cardboard box? Are there really that many tiny people just running around Fiona World that we've never seen before? Maybe they were just really excited for Cake because they realized she's the first one that can ever guest star. One tidbit I like though is that Frasier mentions that Cake is like a Greek god, which doubles as some foreshadowing for later stuff in the season, as well as being a reference to a pretty famous character that the voice actress of Cake once played. Fiona's storyline in the episode is that she's decided that she's going to chase after DJ Flame. Not because she's attracted to him, but because he has the business acumen that she needs in order to plan the fundraiser. She reminisces on her relationship with him in a bunch of flashbacks, then at the end of the episode, she runs into him. I have to say, their relationship is incredibly mind-numbingly neutral. There is nothing super romantic, and there is nothing dangerous or toxic, extra steamy or spicy. There's just nothing to this. It is a standard relationship where the characters hit it off by talking to each other about mundane things. She met him a few times at the various jobs that she had a few mildly amusing conversations, and apparently that was enough for them to fall in love. If you're going to go through the trouble of showing us these flashbacks, please make them have a point. Show us why Fiona was so attracted to this guy. I really wish that the show would give me any reason to care about her and DJ Flame. Now for the Huntress part of the episode. She starts off as this upgraded seed from last time, but she's able to collect enough nutrients to finally grow back into the Huntress that we know, becoming a few cute little creatures along the way. Fiona finds her and tries to help her get more nutrients. Then she runs off trying to find the heart of the forest, while Fiona and Cake chase after her, with Cake triumphantly declaring that they're on a quest. Finally, all three main characters are together in the same place and seemingly about to embark on a big journey. You would think that, but that's not what happens. Instead, Fiona realizes that she's from Ooh, calls Simon, and Huntress and Bubblegum get on the phone and start yelling at each other because Huntress won't tell Bubblegum what's going on with Finn. Green Wizard rules, of course. Conceptually, this is great. Bubblegum and Huntress Wizard are both acting in character. They're both very strong-willed, and they're trying to achieve the same goal, but cannot work together. And because Finn's life is on the line here, the high drama and yelling at each other feels completely earned and justified. You see where both characters are coming from. But this is ruined because it's all over as abruptly as it began. Huntress smashes the phone and then that's it. Goodbye connection to Ooh. I love the idea of this, but please give us a little bit more. Allow this scene to play out a little bit longer. But no time for drama, no time for things that I want to see, because we have to go right back to flirting with DJ Flame. So all that momentum we were seemingly building to having the characters go on a quest and do something, it just dies because we're back to this flirting thing. And then afterwards, Fionna goes home and finds out, uh-oh, she never paid her rent and she's been evicted. What on earth is she going to do? This episode is a bad adventure time. The tone is completely off here. It's just a tease. Every time one of these stories is about to go somewhere, we cut away. Prismo, Simon and the ice thing, Huntress and Bubblegum on the phone. The ideas are good, but they're undercooked. Even Fionna and Flame's flashbacks could have been good if we had seen a little bit more drama in their relationship. The season started out so strong, and it just feels like these last two episodes have been spinning their wheels. Episode 5, The Butterfly and the River. So this episode is better structured than the previous two in that, other than a brief scene of Ooh at the end of the episode, we mostly get to focus on the two main stories and one side story. What is a little weird though is that the two main stories have a very similar runtime, so they compete with each other, instead of feeling like one main story and the second one feeling like a B-plot, which is usually how TV is done and generally just feels more right to an audience, even if it's kind of hard to place why. Anyway, we open up with Marshall's backstory with Simone. She was an ice cream lady who was more like a nice cream lady, giving him free ice cream, playing music with him, and telling him it's okay to make mistakes. And this comes after his mother was incredibly cruel to him. So this is somewhat of a reveal of what's going on with Marshall and his mom and Simone, and I have to say this is not very interesting. If you know anything about Simon and Marcy, you assume that Marshall and Simone had some sort of a friendship. So far at least, I haven't seen anything that makes this story interesting. Since this is Marshall's big focus episode, you would think that maybe they would want to flesh out their friendship a little more, let us see more than one time of them hanging out, and show us why Simone was so important other than just being an adult who was decent to him, but I suppose there's still time in future episodes for that to be the case. For now though, this is not all Marshall gets to do in the episode, because this is Gary and Marshall's relationship episode. Gary gets bossy and controlling while Marshall is trying to help him cook, then Gary invites Marshall to meet his parents, which seems like a setup that is rife with drama. Sitcom drama, but still drama nonetheless. So Gary and Marshall are both nervous about this meeting, and then it turns out that Gary's parents are completely normal and nice people, and the event goes off basically without a hitch. Gary gets a little embarrassed, but in a very normal way. Marshall isn't bitter or jealous, he seems to be having a good time with Gary's parents. He gets a little bummed about Simone, but he doesn't want to talk about that. As far as Gary being bossy, him and Marshall just talk it out like adults at the end of the episode. No one's feelings are hurt, no further drama ensues. Gary takes being compared to Marshall's mom weirdly well. Everything's fine now. So that's my problem with the story in the episode. It's just boring. There is no real drama, even though it seems like we might finally be getting some. It seems odd that these characters based off of the very explosive and different Bubblegum and Marceline seemingly get along completely fine in this iteration. There is nothing about them that screams, we have massive differences that we have to overcome. I'm sure there's people out there that want to just see this really low-key, low-stakes, they barely argue, everything is pretty much fine type of relationship from these guys, but I expect a story, I expect a drama, I expect something interesting to happen. Give them twists and turns in their relationship, have big explosive moments. Of course you keep them together, I'm not saying break them up, but a little bit more conflict would go a long way. Not just because I think it would be more interesting, but it would be more true to the characters that these two are based on. So the other big storyline here is Huntress trying to get back to Ooh. She finds a tree that matches Finn's treehouse and performs a spell to travel through it. This accidentally traps Cake on her arm and leads them inside the tree where they have a time adventure. The time tree is a fun, adventure-timey concept. They play with the butterfly effect, literally. watch the world change from fantasy to mundanity, and see an alternate future where Fiona works for Hannah. I like how it furthers Cake's storyline because of Huntress encouraging her to be more animalistic and cat-like. Huntress doesn't understand why Cake wouldn't want to embrace her instincts, but Cake is trying to reject that and fit in this society. The aesthetics inside the tree are wonderful, and I really like the way Cake is animated on Huntress's hand. She's very expressive and high energy. At one point, she shapeshifts into a sock puppet, and it's really charming. I love all the fun fantasy rules that the time tree has, like the water tastes like whatever water was around the tree in that period of its life, and the fact that Huntress and Cake cannot actually leave the tree. You know, in the tree part of the tree, that sort of thing. My main complaint is that I wish this had more time to cook. I could have spent an entire episode just watching these two in the time tree. It would have been interesting to see a little more of Fiona working for Hannah, and I'm really intrigued by this concept of the wave that normalizes everything not actually happening all at once. How did this work? Was it some sort of ripple effect that happens through multiple time periods? I don't know, because they don't go into it. This would have also been a great storyline to actually see more of the backstory that we randomly flashed to throughout the season. Instead of having Marshall and Simone's thing just be this flashback at the beginning of the episode, it could have happened naturalistically while Cake and Huntress are traveling through time. We could have seen Simone and Marshall's story take place over many, many years, and it would have felt natural because that's what the story is about. Time travel. There's nothing wrong with doing these flashbacks that are just flashbacks, but if you can make the flashbacks be framed around an actual narrative device, that ends up making it feel more satisfying and having it flow better instead of just, okay, we're randomly going to show you flashbacks now. Fiona is also in this episode. She shows up as a listening ear, playing both sides with her friend's non-conflict. Then she has another dull conversation with DJ Flame, promises Queenie even more money by Sunday, and then turns to Marshall's horrible mom for help with the venue without even asking him or Gary. At this point, it feels like both the DJ Flame and the Sweet Spot storylines are dragging on. It doesn't seem like much is actually happening with them. It's mostly just Fiona running around the city having conversation after conversation with DJ Flame. It's a bummer that Fiona doesn't get to go on this adventure with Huntress and Cake. It would have been nice to see the three main characters actually spending significant time together after last episode seemed like the group had finally solidified and decided on a quest. Oh, and as far as the epic cliffhanger from last episode where Fiona gets evicted, well, as it turns out, she's just gonna crash with her friend Cake. She says she'll deal with it later, and then this never gets brought up again, even though Cake also doesn't have any actual way to pay the rent. What a terrible, unceremonious resolution to that cliffhanger. And I'm super confused at the fact that Fiona not being able to pay rent is apparently a problem, but Cake not having any way to pay rent is just completely fine. Also in this episode, Simon wishes on the demonic wishing eye back in Ooh to try to save Finn. It doesn't work, but it does make him older, and this is relevant because we know from Together Again, Finn dies as an old man. So if you weren't sure if his life was really at stake before, now you might be getting a little nervous because they could legitimately kill Finn here. It does line up with the continuity. I guess it's nice that something actually happened to Finn, even though it's not a positive thing, but it still feels like these characters in Ooh are just failing over and over again. I would have liked to have actually spent some time with them and had a story, but no, we have to cut to them just to show this one little scene. This could have easily been in the previous episode or the next episode or anywhere else in the season, but they put it here. Because even in this episode, which is a little more focused than the last two, it still has too many things going on. 2 A-plots, plus Fiona stuff, plus we cut to this for reasons that I cannot understand. Also, I have to make note of an especially abysmal joke in the episode. There's this big reveal moment where Fiona's dress has been ripped in the butt and she looks really stupid. And the first 2 times I watched this episode, I honestly didn't know what it was about. This is a payoff to an earlier line where Fiona asks Huntress where she got the fabric to make her cape. And while that's a pretty standard joke, the fact that the setup and payoff are separated by 3 whole minutes with an entire scene between Marshall and Gary happening in between makes it very strange and hard to pick up on. For some reason, earlier in the scene, her butt is covered by Cake's tail, as if this is a reveal that they are waiting to show to us, but I don't get why. The joke doesn't get funnier with more time in between it, and it's not like this subtle thing where if you miss it, it's just kind of whatever. There is this big prominent reveal of her butt. So the first 2 times I watched this, I'm just like, oh, there's clearly something I missed or didn't understand. I'm gonna give this one a light bad venture time. The show can't seem to make up its mind on whether it wants to be a very low stakes, down to earth, chill vibes type of show, or a high fantasy, action oriented, the world is at stake kind of show. Because they're trying to do both and it's hurting both sides of the coin. Meanwhile, Fionna and the crew are doing the same thing they always do, trying and failing to save Finn, and running into DJ Flame. And none of this stuff is blended well together. It still feels like I'm watching multiple different shows that keep cutting each other off. What a waste of a perfectly good time tree. Episode 6, The Bird in the Clock. So this is the big dream episode. By no means is this a fresh idea for Adventure Time, but it is a formula that has proven to work for the show again and again, and here is no different. The dream part of this episode is one of the best concepts in the season, because it really throws the weirdness of Adventure Time right in your face. We have these really creative time-themed enemies, blink and you miss it weirdness, references to things that happened in Season 1 and Adventure Time, and plenty of symbolism. Beyond that, this episode feels like big things are finally happening. Huntress actually kills the Cosmic Owl, a character that has appeared many times and has a lot of significance in Adventure Time. We also get to see Farm World Finn again, and Fionna and Finn finally get to interact. Granted, it's still in a dream, but this is the first time that Fionna and this version of Finn have ever interacted. But fear not, all your favorite Fionna and Cake Season 2 staples are still here. If you want to see Fionna flirting with DJ Flame, we've got it. If you want to see pointless scenes anew that don't add anything, oh, that's here too. What's that? You want to be reminded that Marshall's mom is a big fat meanie pants? Rest assured, this episode has got you covered. All joking aside, yes, this episode still has all of these weird repetitive plot points that we just keep hammering over and over again without any actual progression. And speaking of repetition, let's talk about the content of the dream. Finn dies again and again and gets resurrected as if this is a stage play. The end result is that it's something that starts out disturbing and ends up darkly hilarious. At first, you're just distraught seeing this beloved character die in gruesome ways, but as it just keeps going on and on, it gets ridiculous. And you gotta love something that can disturb and amuse at the same time. I find it interesting they used green instead of red for Finn's guts and blood, but I suppose it does fit because green is the color of the poison in him. But I do kind of wonder if it was a censorship note instead of just a creative one. Either way, it doesn't distract from how gritty Finn's deaths are. I also think it's great that they included Farm World Finn. Yes, he doesn't get a ton to do, but he's still along for the adventure and not just a wasted potential quick cameo. Looking at you, Vampire King. And it's really nice that he gets a chance to repay main series Finn. Inside the dream, it also feels like we get the absolute best version of these characters. Watching Huntress actually do her thing and go on a hunt to kill this cosmic being is super cool. And this is the only time in the entire season when we get to see Finn actually do something, being the hero that he is, saving Fionna from a death blow and treating her like she's his equal. And it's cool to see Fionna over the course of this episode finally step up and be a hero in her own right. Seeing Finn get murdered reminds her of her trauma, but she's able to work through it through the repetitive task of trying to save Finn over and over again. Also in this episode, Huntress finally meets Hunter. 6 episodes in, and we are finally doing something mildly interesting with the multiverse concept. Unfortunately, it is a brief scene where Huntress just dismisses Hunter entirely and then physically assaults them. This dynamic is not interesting because it's exactly what you'd expect, and of course, they're not given any time to let anything actually play out. You also have to love how Gary has to ask Cake who on earth Huntress even is, because Fionna apparently didn't introduce her to the rest of her friends. For a show that's trying to do this ensemble cast, it's so weird how characters do not want to interact with each other. This episode also sees Marshall finally actually interacting with his mom for the first time this season after he's been dodging her phone calls. It's another thing that's just completely downplayed. She makes a few snarky comments, he just kind of looks at the ground, and that's it. There's no confrontation, there's no big dramatic thing that happens. They just have a conversation. You would not know that Marshall and his mom are not even on speaking terms at this point because things are just pretty low key. You'd also think that after Gary publicly called her a bad mother, she would have a lot meaner things to say to him when they meet again in this episode, but no, she makes a petty comment about how this casket is for Marshall's partner and it could be him or it could be someone else. And that's it. That's the best that this rich, powerful, and evil woman can come up with to spite Gary. So yeah, as usual, I have my gripes with the way a lot of things are handled, But I can say that the bulk of this episode is focused on killing the Cosmic Owl and the cool dream stuff, and all of that works really well. For that reason, I have to say this is a good time. And that should really tell you how much I like the dream stuff, because, oh man, the rest of the stuff in this episode was really tempting me to give it a lower rating. Like Fiona's big epiphany to, wait for it, chase after DJ Flame, as if she hasn't been doing that since episode 3. But okay, the Cosmic Owl is dead, and we're finally going somewhere this season. Bring on the next one. Number 7, The Wolves Who Wandered. All of my complaining about how unfocused this show has been can get thrown out for this episode, because finally, we have something that is 100% focused the entire episode through on one idea. DJ Flame has gone missing, and everyone is trying to find him. Fennel and Fiona take magic drugs from Huntress in order to see his aura and track him down. This leads to Cake and Huntress having to chase after them to make sure they don't get in trouble, which then leads to Huntress teaming up with Hunter to actually find Flame. And while these two get up to some weird alien shenanigans, it still feels like a cohesive episode because it is all about one idea: finding Flame. Characters have split off into little groups to do this, but still, there's an actual connectivity to it all. This feels more like an episode of television than the previous ones. It feels like an actual story that we are following from start to finish, instead of a bunch of tiny stories that have been stapled together haphazardly. All that being said, I still think this is a bad Adventure Time. Look, I'm glad it feels like an actual episode, but unfortunately, it feels like a bad, dumb episode where a bunch of random things happen and nothing is ever explained. So there's aliens in this non-magical world. Why do they want Fiona and Fennel? Why are they telling Ellis cryptic clues about Fiona World? Was it all a dream? Actually, no, it wasn't a dream, because next episode Fiona still has the ring that was given to her. Okay, but if it's not a dream, then what was actually happening with DJ Flame? Was he really on an alien planet, or was he really with the lemon carbs? There's just a lot of really open-ended questions, and I know Adventure Time isn't always big on giving us answers to things, but it feels like in a especially vague episode where it just has Fiona and Fennel running all over the city, doing random stuff, in a season where Fiona already spends a lot of her time just running around the city doing random stuff. And my biggest question mark of all with this one is, what is the deal with Fennel? She has never met Fiona before, and yet she's apparently admired her for so long? What? Is the idea that she's just a big fan of how Fiona saved the city that one time? I guess that would make some level of sense, but the way she's talking makes it seem like this is some deep personal admiration that goes way back before that. Also, if she likes and respects Fiona so much, why is she dating her ex? And why is Fennel Fiona's exact doppelganger? In the world before it was rebooted, presumably Fennel had a similar backstory to Fern, but the world's been rebooted and we need normal explanations for everything. So what is the deal here? Are they long-lost twins? Is Fennel a creepy stalker who got some sort of facial reconstructive surgery to look like Fiona? It's weird. This episode makes it very, very clear that these two characters have a lot in common. More than just looks, they actually act identically to each other. And yet we're not going to get any sort of explanation of how that actually works in this world. Even though this is an episode all about Fiona and Fennel spending time together. Apparently, the people behind the show also thought this line was problematic, because in the storyboard notes on the production blog, you can see that someone actually questioned if this line makes any sort of sense. I'm not sure why it still ended up in the final show without any sort of justification around the line, but it's clear that I'm not the only one that thinks that this whole thing is just very, very strange and off-putting. On top of that, the two of them exchange some really deep looks when they're floating through space later on, and I'm really questioning if the writers are trying to make it seem like these two are romantically interested in each other. Because if so, ew. Actually, come to think of it, why is Fennel even in this world? Fern only exists because the grass sword and the fin sword got mixed together, but the fin sword only exists because of Prismo's intervention. It exists outside of the multiverse. So how did Fennel even come to be back before the rebooted Fiona world? Oh man, this is just getting too confusing. Anyway, speaking of creepy stalkers, I did actually lie to you. There is one scene in this episode that doesn't have anything to do with DJ Flame, and it is Marshall's. We find out the big reason why Simone hasn't hasn't been in his life is because of a restraining order. His mom's minion, who has been stalking him, saw Simone and him in the park all those years ago, and then told Hannah that she was creeping on him, and so Hannah issued a restraining order. We don't get to actually see any of this stuff, it's just told to us via this minion. The scene is really out of place in this episode, and this is such an underwhelming explanation for why these characters had a falling out, and I'm starting to think that maybe this entire storyline is nothing but a bunch of short scenes and simple explanations of things we don't get to see, while it shamelessly steals from Adventure Time's best storyline. So what's Marshall gonna do after finding this news out? He's just going to do nothing but sit there and mope, and then call Fiona and tell her that he doesn't want to do the show. What a great storyline and character. So also in this episode is Huntress, who expressly does not want to be involved in Fiona's stupid problems, but gets dragged into it anyway. Then she tries to get help from Hunter in finding DJ Flame after she was really horrible to them last episode, which Hunter points out and says that they won't help her until she mentions, "I'm a plant." And apparently that's all it takes to get Hunter on board with this person that assaulted them last episode. The two find Flame, and it turns out he's just been performing a show for the Lemon Carbs. Womp womp. There's really nothing interesting about Hunter and Huntress's interactions here, and it feels like it contradicts the previous episode's interaction pretty hard. If you're gonna have her be this mean to them when they first meet, maybe they should have met earlier in the season so that more time feels like it's passed. Anyway, the main storyline is that Fiona and Fennel take drugs given to them by Huntress so that they can get stanky wizard eyes to see where Flame went. They run around for a bit and then have this heart-to-heart about how Fiona thinks that everyone popped out of the womb perfect, and Fennel has to correct her and say that Hunter actually has been through a lot of stuff and they've worked on themselves quite a bit to get to where they are. It is a good lesson to learn that other people have problems too, and you shouldn't get so wrapped up in your own stuff that you forget about that. However, it seems particularly immature for this adult woman to have to learn this. The show has a higher rating than Adventure Time and was supposed to have grown up with the audience. Why are we still doing lessons that would be at home in preschool television? Fiona just comes off very stupid here. Anyway, eventually they end up on this alien planet, and it's definitely the most interesting part of the episode. Even though it's another thing that just ruins the immersion of Fiona World. So we have actors that are 6 inches tall and aliens, and in the future these butterfly monsters are gonna take over. Like, if we're gonna go this far away from the city setting, what is the point of staying in Fiona World? Why not just give us a multiversal adventure where we actually get to go to fun worlds? If the people making this show also think that Fiona World by itself is boring and we need to expand it out with things like aliens, then that seems to prove that this world is not interesting enough to hold this entire season. In which case, why didn't we just get another multiversal adventure? Anyway, the alien planet is fine. It's the female equivalent of Adventure Time's Mars, which is Venus, and the statue that rules it all is the Venus de Milo instead of being the Lincoln statue. The world also has its own very specific color palette, which gives it a very different look to the rest of the show. The world is obsessed with love, and it even does combat by way of love. It's neat, but I don't love it because it doesn't really get a lot of time to be fleshed out. I wish this was something that happened towards the beginning of the episode, so we could have spent the whole time here and really develop this world and tell a full-fledged story here. As it is, the characters show up here very randomly, a character sings to them, they spot DJ Flame, and then enter love combat in order to free him, which is over just as quickly as it begins. It may not be a mess in the same way that other episodes are, but in terms of the writing, it's still very sloppy. Our lead character comes across like a complete moron who doesn't understand the basic concept of other people having problems. Fennel is a weird character that I don't know what they're actually going for with her. Half the episode is spent with characters running around accomplishing nothing. Dynamics are completely off, like with Huntress and Hunter, and completely random things seem to happen, like aliens beaming Fiona and Fennel up. And story-wise, it feels like they pulled the all just a dream ending, even though it actually wasn't. It's all just very muddled what this even is. Episode 8, The Insect Who Sang. So here we are, the big event that the season has been leading up to. And I do have to give the show credit for actually starting to close some of the storylines before the last episode. All too often, these type of shows drag every single plot line out until the finale, where all these climactic things have to happen and everything feels really rushed and there's no time for proper closure. Let's start with Marshall, who didn't want to sing at the fundraiser until he sees Simone. They have a brief exchange about the restraining order, and then he sings as she watches. And for the most part, that is a wrap on their story. There is very little conflict between Marshall and Simone, and everything is solved really easily. There's no emphasizing how sad it is that they missed out on all this time together because of a stupid misunderstanding. Marshall isn't that hurt that Simone chose to follow his mom's orders instead of still meeting with him. Simone doesn't feel that guilty about abandoning him. There's really no hard feelings here. It's just a very simple resolution to what should be something that is filled with drama of some sort. Marshall playing the song to show that he got his mojo back is good. That's a great idea. The song itself is fine. It's not one of Adventure Time's best songs, but it works for what it is. It's just that this does not feel like a satisfying conclusion to the storyline. I still don't really understand what his friendship with Simone had to do with him playing large crowds. I'll talk about this more when we get to the storyline analysis, but Marshall's stuff just completely whiffs here. Huntress and Fiona get dragged away by the Cosmic Court, which leaves Cake to put on the fundraiser mostly by herself. And she miraculously achieves this by pushing herself past the limit. I have no complaints about Cake's part of this story. It is great to see her pull off such a tremendous feat by actually putting a lot of hard work into it. And the cherry on top of the story is when she goes to kiss Emkron. It's awkward and off-putting. There's something about it that's not quite right, and yet she faints, and we don't get to find out why in this episode. It's a really nice twist because I thought that she was just gonna end up with him at the end. The fact that there's something off about it makes it really interesting. As for the Cosmic Trial, it seems to run on absolutely zero logic. First of all, we know the characters are guilty of murder, which makes their lies and deceit a little bit despicable. The Cosmic Owl was just a guy doing his job. He didn't pick who died. Maybe they should have tried to kill the Cosmic Owl's boss. Oh wait, they still didn't reveal who the boss was, even though they were mentioned in season 1, and it would have been a nice time to do so here. Prismo doesn't get to do anything, by the way. He shows up distraught that the Cosmic Owl is dead, and then disappears. This would have been a great chance to include him in the episode and have him actually do something. Maybe make him feel conflicted about having to accuse Fiona of this crime because, as she mentions, he's kinda sorta like her dad. But no, Prismo's not allowed to do anything this season but sit there. Then there's accusing Finn of committing the crime. This is a horrible, low-down, pathetic thing that our main character has done. And yes, this does get explained in a later episode, but as of right now, it is really, really hard to even remotely like Fiona when she is willing to throw a completely innocent party under the bus. And then for some reason, Fiona is surprised that Huntress hits her for that. She's like, oh, what did I do? You idiot, Fiona, you just doomed the boyfriend she's been trying to save all season, and you don't know why she hit you in return? And on top of all of that, the court just lets them go. Even though at minimum they were proven to have dumped the body of the Cosmic Owl, which seems like it should be a crime in and of itself. Also during the trial, Fiona says a bunch of stuff that we don't get to hear because it's montaged away with a song that's happening at the Sweet Spot performance, which is lazy. What evidence could she possibly put forth that Finn killed the Cosmic Owl that is actually persuading these people? You can apparently just accuse anyone and then they'll let you go and start interrogating that person. I know some aspect of Adventure Time runs on rule of goofy, where things are just kind of silly and Abraham Lincoln is the king of bars, but this show is trying to present the trial as an intimidating moment. Lives are on the line here. Something bad could happen, and they're here because they murdered someone. If everyone being so stupid is supposed to be a joke, I don't think it was very funny and severely undercuts the seriousness of this story. And when they get back to Fiona World, Fiona sees that Cake put on this whole thing without her and gets really upset. She decides to kiss DJ Flame, which naturally upsets both Hunter and Fennel. Then Fiona runs away and destroys the Sweet Spot. And of course, this is all after she has falsely accused Finn, potentially dooming him to 1,000 years in the pain vortex. Then we're treated to more of her whining about how she can't do anything right and blah blah blah. Remember how I said her crash out in episode 3 was way too soon? Well, here we are again, and I simply don't care because we've already been through this. It's another crash out. They only have 2 episodes to potentially redeem Fiona in my eyes after this performance, and all I can say is good luck. Having it be this overdramatic is going to make it really hard to claw this back and be like, oh no, wait, actually, Fiona's a good person. Don't worry about this. This was a low moment for her. But I guess we'll see how it plays out in the next episodes. As of right now, she seems like a complete failure of a person who is doomed to hurt everyone. Not just everyone evil, simply hurt everyone. The trial could have been really interesting. There were a bunch of different angles they could have gone with. Maybe put Fiona's character on trial. Have Bluey's dad say that in the absence of evidence, you need to prove yourself based upon your character. Have you been a good person? And then that could be an examination of how Fiona's acted this season. I don't know. There's just one idea. There could have been any number of things they could have done that didn't wind up as lame as this. Scarab being the prosecutor is a super cool idea, but even that feels wasted here because nothing comes of any of this. I almost forgot, there's a really cool opening sequence that's animated in this very twitchy style, and while I really like it, it just has nothing to do with what goes on in this episode, and it would have been more fitting to be in episode 9 or 10. But at least I can say that this one doesn't have the problem where everything feels cramped and like there's no time for anything. So I guess I can't complain too much about just a fun opening sequence that is relevant to the season overall. And I can't forget about the Ooh crew. They're in this episode too. Their plan this time is to go to the heart of the forest and try to find the source of the poison. They find the heart and somehow miss the fact that there's a giant glowing portal on its head, and Bubblegum says that it needs to be put out of its misery and kills it with the ball bam blurglebur, which is a pretty decent joke, but as usual they don't contribute much. Aside from a cliffhanger that Finn has been taken to the cosmic court. Bum bum bum. It's a
bad venture time.
At this point, my faith in the rest of the season somehow managing to salvage all of this and cobble together a good story has just hit rock bottom, like Fiona. Episode 9, The Worm and His Orchard. This is the one episode this season Rebecca Sugar worked on, and it shows. This one feels like it completely nails what makes the first season of the show so great. It hits both the fun fantasy as well as the introspective nature of Adventure Time. All three characters go on wonderful, interesting journeys in the undergrowth. Fiona meets Fern, and he guides her into realizing that other people also have issues. Huntress finds Witch Wizard and confronts what seeking absolute power and nothing else does to a person. And Cake meets the karmic worm, and he teaches her about how wonderful change can be, and how looking into differences reveals the constants. Having all three of these characters in this one location makes their stories feel unified, even though they spend most of the time apart. Not to mention the general theme of all three of them learning and growing makes this feel like a really cohesive episode. There's no special opening, and we only see Ooh very briefly at the end. Neither of these three stories feel rushed or like any one of them dominate the episode. It's paced beautifully and really goes to show how important that is in a show that's juggling so many protagonists, stories, and flashbacks. Cake's story in particular is a real standout. It's a very Steven Universe-esque duet between Cake and the worm, with him trying to help her find her confidence. The fact that he sings this song and then there's a beat and then she chimes in with her verse, that's straight out of Steven Universe and it works so well every time. Additionally, I love this worm's design and the design of the undergrowth, and Cake's line about what this worm does is particularly funny. And there's also something very charming about the way Cake is drawn here. Not just in her transformations, also when she's her usual self, there's just something very appealing and cute about her here that perfectly complements the fact that she's reached the point in her journey where she's finally accepting herself. I've never seen an episode so full of poop be so beautiful. Huntress decides to break the cycle of violence and greed by not taking from the heart and instead offering it kindness, inspired by the kindness that Fiona and Cake have shown her. Then she continues this by helping a corrupted gem, mutated plant creature in the undergrowth. After, she fights Witch Wizard again, who is also mutated. This episode really hammers in the symbiotic nature of green magic. The heart of the forest needs people to take care of it and not just abuse it. Similarly, Witch Wizard shows that if you just take and take and take, all you're going to end up with is corruption and poison. Meanwhile, when Huntress helps the heart also helps her. It's a lesson in not using and abusing things, but instead working mutually to benefit and help each other. Then there's Fiona. This episode puts her on the path to working on her trauma and trying to be a better person. She meets Fern, of all characters, who somehow ended up in the undergrowth and knows a thing or two about being in the shadow of Finn. She learns that Finn and all of her friends also have issues and traumas too, and it starts to sink sink in just how much of an inconsiderate jerk she's been. Fiona's story is the weakest of the three here, but it's presumed that it's going to be wrapped up a little bit better in the next episode, so I'm fine with that. Fern is an interesting choice to bring back here. When I first saw him, I was like, oh, I guess no character's ever actually gone in this franchise. But honestly, I did kind of miss seeing him. Like Huntress, he was another character that was starting to get more focused towards the end of the series, and it did feel like he could have gotten more appearances had the show continued on and not had the finale right then and there. And the fact that he spends his time fertilizing the tree that represents Finn's trauma to try and help it grow and help Finn let go of some of it is actually really sweet of an end for his character. Well, at least an end for now for his character. Not a lot of old Adventure Time characters have actually aged as of Fionna and Cake, even though time has passed, but you can tell that Fern has spent a long time contemplating what he did with his life, and he's definitely not just used here as a cameo character that gets one or two lines and just disappears. As for Fionna seeing the trauma of her friends, it's an interesting way to tie those characters into this episode and make them feel like they're actually connected to the story, which I appreciate. I still think it's a little bit silly that Fionna doesn't seem to understand that other people have problems too, but at least she's starting to get the message as of this episode. I also like the mythos of the undergrowth. All of these painballs that come raining down and how the karmic worm helps people try to process their trauma and how he's similar but different to the cosmic owl, who was his brother. And the undergrowth is just a gorgeous and fun location. There's a bunch of vines, weird plant life, really fun, vibrant colors, and some of that Adventure Time goofiness in the fact that the karmic worm literally lives in the pizza box that he stole the pizza from, which is why he was cursed to be down here. Turning processing grief into a literal location and character that actually eats it is interesting, and it's the sort of fantasy that I really like out of Adventure Time. It allows the show to touch on some deeper and darker things while still maintaining a fun sense of cartoonishness and literal representation of metaphysical thoughts. And speaking of trauma, let's talk about it. Throughout Adventure Time, Finn mentions throwing something traumatic in the vault, meaning that he doesn't actually process the weird things that he sees, but instead locks them away in a part of his brain where he doesn't have to think about them. This has made him emotionally stunted in some ways, and I like to think that this episode acknowledges that Finn has been through a lot of trauma, and I think it's very fitting they use the clip from Escape from the Citadel, where he gets his arm ripped off because he is desperately trying to prevent his father from escaping from him. Additionally, we see a giant painball of Finn screaming out for Jake. Fern tells Fionna that she's not ready to see this one, and it is a clear indicator that this is how Jake dies, because obviously that is Finn's biggest grief, and the thing he is incapable of moving on from. Now, of course, the writers don't want to give us any hints as to how Jake dies or what's happening here. They want everything open-ended for the future, but I kinda get it with this one because it is the sort of story that you don't even really want to give any hints as to until they're ready to tell it, because fingers crossed, that could be the Adventure Time movie. It's just unfortunate that it happens in this season where there's a bunch of other things that they're like, tee-hee, we're not going to tell you about. In addition to the other characters' traumas, we get to see Fiona's backstory a little bit. Apparently, she spent a significant amount of time in a cat shelter, and she's referred to as a stray as well. I guess this is meant to parallel how Finn was raised by Jake's parents, but it doesn't really seem to follow in the same way, because Finn got actual humanoid anthropomorphic parents, even though they were dogs. Whereas it's unclear who actually raised Fionna. Was it the people at the shelter, or the cats themselves? I don't really know. But it's yet another example of Fionna World not really making any sense, but it is nice to finally at least get some explanation as to why Fionna is not good at being an adult. Clearly, she was never taught, which is something that she alludes to back when talking to Baby Finn in episode 2. Alright, I've gushed about this episode enough. For all the things I do like, I still have issues. First of all, this episode feels like it belongs in a completely different season. It feels so tonally different and better to the previous episodes that some of the moments don't feel as earned as they should. Witch Wizard has been irrelevant to the season since midway through episode 2, and this battle would have hit a lot harder if she was a more persistent rival showing up in even one more episode towards the middle of the season. It's also a little weird that Cake jumps right from kissing Emkron last episode to immediately flirting with the worm here. I like their friendship, but I feel like it should maybe be a little bit less romantic, or maybe develop a little bit slower, or perhaps if she kissed Amkron 2 episodes ago, there would have been a little bit more space and this would have felt a little better. And then there's the Cosmic Owl, who gets to be dead for episodes 7 and 8, and then comes right back here. The sooner he comes back, the less impactful his rebirth is. But I'm not going to hold these things against the episode too harshly, because really it's a failing of episodes 3 through 8. I just wanted to point out that if those episodes were better, this would have been even better than it is, and it's already good. The other negative I have to say is that there should have been a little bit more to the Cosmic Owl's rebirth and quitting his job. The fact that you could just crack open a grief ball and there he is feels very underwhelming of a way to resurrect him. I like the justification that Adventure Time gods are more like ideas that can't really permanently die, but I wish the execution was better. It's also super weird that no one acknowledges that Fionna and Huntress played a major role in his death. Like, they're just hanging out with his brother who's mourning that he died, and Fiona's standing right there. Fionna feels guilty for so many things she's done, so being part of murdering his brother should maybe elicit some sort of reaction. The show moves on pretty quickly, so I know there wasn't really too much time that she could have spoken up before the owl's already back, but still, it should have been a little bit bigger of a moment, because helping kill someone is probably the worst thing Fiona's done this season. Also, the Cosmic Owl quitting should be a huge monumental deal, but of course, there's no repercussions. Scarab's job was to hunt down delinquents, and Cosmic Owl would surely fit under that umbrella. So maybe they're saving that for next season. I don't know. Oh, and then I do also have to say that the stuff taking place in Oo is really disappointing. Apparently, Marceline, Bubblegum, and Simon fought off a bunch of green wizards and tied them up off screen, and Finn gets returned to them from the Cosmic Court without much fanfare or reaction. They only really exist to be at the end of the episode, setting up that next time we're gonna call Finn's mom, which in fairness is a funny joke with the gunshot sound effect, but otherwise I don't see any reason why these should be in this episode. We don't need to hype up the next one. This one was a good enough episode that people are going to tune in for the finale. Overall though, this is the best episode of the season. It really nails a lot of the things that the other episodes have been failing at. And I'm sure it's not entirely on her, because lots of people do work on each of these episodes, but Rebecca Sugar really does understand Adventure Time and what people want to see out of it. She gets how to represent emotion and music and wrapping heavy stuff in a fun cartoony frame. Episode 10, The Bear and the Rose. So this one was dealt a rough hand. It's the finale, so it has to wrap up all these plot lines and characters and give us some closure to what we've seen in the season. It's the show's last chance to possibly make these storylines feel connected and fix any other issues that were in the last 9 episodes. Let's start with Marshall. So him and Simone jam together and the Marshmallow Kid compliments his music and then calls him old. Simone doesn't get to say anything here, she just laughs. If the point was to just show a cute scene of them interacting as an epilogue, that fails because they're barely interacting. They don't actually exchange any words with each other. We'll talk about their storyline as a whole very, very soon, but just know that this scene really doesn't do anything for it. The other stuff Marshall does in this episode is be disappointed in Fionna and then later say that everyone's got issues even if they don't talk about them. There is actually a post-credit scene with him where Hunson Abadir, presumably from Oo, shows up and starts talking to Marshall, which is so out of left field that I kind of love it, even though I'm not entirely sure if this show's gonna get a 3rd season. Next, let's talk about the Oo crew. So, like usual, they don't get to do much. They try one more plan to save Finn by uploading his consciousness, which doesn't work. Then they mourn Finn and later stand as an audience to cheer on Huntress when she saves Finn. Their inclusion in this episode is fine, but it really doesn't beat the allegations that these characters are only here just to fail over and over again until the real main characters can do their job. It is super cool to have all of these familiar characters be here for this big climactic ending where all seems to be lost for Finn and everyone's mourning him, and then he gets resurrected and everyone cheers. But even the celebration is kind of weird because Finn doesn't acknowledge anyone but Huntress. It would have been nice to get a scene of him maybe getting a group hug with all the old characters that have been trying to save his life, or perhaps even a one-on-one thank you with each of them. Prismo is here in a 10-second non-speaking cameo where he does the same thing that he's done all season, absolutely nothing. Scarab puts his hand on Prismo's shoulder, and I guess this is to comfort him over the fact that the Cosmic Owl died, but Scarab also saw the Cosmic Owl get reborn, so if he wanted to comfort Prismo, he could just tell him that. Maybe he's keeping it from him for a reason. I don't know. All this scene really did was just remind me of how much they wasted Prismo this season. Alright, over to Cake. She hangs out with the Karmic Worm before Huntress summons her to find Fiona. She also gets a nice epilogue with Emkron, where the two decide to be friends. So the worm telling Cake that she can freely come and go from the undergrowth is a beautiful message in line with her story. She can live as a human adjacent person in the city when she feels like it, and she can be a goddess in the undergrowth when she wants. She never has to conform to what anyone wants her to be. She is free to be what she wants when she wants. I guess you could say she gets to have her cake and eat it too. And her epilogue with Emkron was something I didn't expect to see, but was a pleasant surprise. It's nice to see that she wasn't just interested in him in a romantic way, but she actually does care about him and felt bad that she hurt him. Also, I like that Cake plays a small but important role in saving Finn. She's the bridge between Ooh and Fiona World that allows Huntress to contact Fiona. Cake's appearance in this episode is great. No notes. Huntress, though, I am a bit more mixed on. On the one hand, her attempts to and then eventual success in escaping from the undergrowth is great, and another fun use of a different style. And in isolation, the sequence of her resurrecting Finn is beautiful. The music, the visuals, the theme of self-sacrifice, not to mention how great it is that it doesn't completely work. The fake out of thinking he's okay when he's only been physically saved and is still dead inside. On its own, it's very nice, but it doesn't feel earned or as impactful as it should have been. These Huntress seeds haven't been referenced since episode 2. Metaphorically, she's sacrificing some of herself, but not really because there is nothing tangibly actually lost to her. It's a beautiful idea, but ultimately it boils down to, and then she saved him with magic. If those seeds were developed more, or if they explained that Huntress was losing parts of herself or her power, I think this could have been fantastic. Furthermore, it doesn't really help her character arc of learning to trust and work with others. Yes, her calling for Fiona is a payoff of that, but I would have liked to have seen her work with Bubblegum as a follow-up to that phone call, showing that she's grown so much since episode 4. We do get a little bit of that with her becoming a teacher at the end of the episode, teaching not just green mages, but all wizards how to use green magic and do it in a way that is non-exploitative. It's perhaps a little uninspired that she is now the second of 2 focus characters in Fiona and Cake to end up becoming professors as a means of showing their growth. Not the most original ending for her, but it works. I would have also liked to have seen a little bit more interaction between Huntress and Finn. They have this really cute, tearful reunion, but after that we don't see them interact. Finn is there at her lesson, but he's just off in the corner with Nepter. People want to see cute moments between these characters, and considering that the season has spent a lot of time on relationships, you would think that we could get maybe like a few more cute moments of Huntress and Finn bonding and reconnecting. Throw it in that montage at the end, I don't care, but just give us a little bit of something here. Lastly, we have to talk about Fiona, and Finn by extension. This has the difficult task of undoing the damage that Fiona has done in episode 8, and allowing her to be forgiven by her friends. Quite frankly, after just how bad of a person they made her in episode 8, I don't know that there was really anything that this one episode alone could do to fully redeem her. Yes, we do also have stuff that happened in the previous episode, but that was more Fiona contemplating what to do. This is the episode where she has to actually interact with all her friends that she's hurt. She comes face to face with Gary and Marshall and explains that she was the one who destroyed the sweet spot. And the way these guys react is just funny to me. They just open their mouths agape, not saying anything, and then slowly walk off crying. Because this is Fiona's big apology tour episode, I guess we can't dwell too much on their emotions, but it seems like a really understated response to having your friend sabotage your business that they've also claimed that they've been working to help you on. They really don't have anything to say to her here. And don't get me wrong, them saying nothing could have been a very powerful statement of just how destroyed they were by this. But the way it's acted just doesn't seem like they really care that much, if I'm being completely honest. There should have been a scene of Marshall and Gary talking about how much they felt betrayed by Fiona's actions away from Fiona. They do show up again later in the episode and talk about it a little bit with her, but I feel like there should have been some debrief between the two of them of, wow, that was insane that just happened. I can't believe Fionna betrayed us. But no, we don't really get any insight into their inner thoughts. It's all about Fionna. She then hears Hunter and Fennel talking about her, and it's very odd that Hunter's the one that wants to cut Fionna a lot of slack, even though Fionna has personally hurt Hunter quite a bit this season, and Fennel really still honestly barely knows Fionna. Sure, be upset that your boyfriend cheated on you, and maybe don't be so happy with the girl that initiated the kiss, but your first actual interaction with her was only a few episodes ago, and I don't think very much time in the world of the show has passed. But don't worry, because we tease that she's romantically interested in Fionna again by having her say, I really thought we could be, long pause, friends. And speaking of characters that want Fionna, she talks with DJ Flame. He tries to get back with her again, and Fionna talks about how she only wanted to be with him because she felt like she's trying to force this happy ending, and they don't really belong together. I appreciate the insight into Fionna's character she's offering here, but I feel like Flame shouldn't get let off the hook this easily for wanting to cheat on his girlfriend, and his appearance in this episode does not do anything to make him an interesting character to me. And it's at this point that Fionna gets called to connect to Finn's subconscious. The journey to get there is really cool and filled with tons of Easter eggs, and then we get a really interesting scene of Fionna and Finn having a conversation. In making this video, I've gone back and forth on this conversation. Part of me feels like this should be deeper and bigger because it is the culmination of everything that's happened in the season, but another part of me likes how low-key it is. The fact that it isn't this big epic giant moment, but instead a quiet conversation where they discuss simple truths and things that aren't super deep, but still important to growing as a person. Finn not being able to move on from Jake's death was already a controversial writing decision that they made in the special Together Again, and they are sticking by it here. Finn was deeply, deeply hurt by Jake's passing, and we don't know exactly when it happened, but it seems to be not that long ago from this point in the franchise. Finn doesn't come to some grand realization, he just decides that life is worth living and there are people that care about him. And thematically, I do love this way of connecting Finn and Fiona's journeys. I'm not going to pretend like it's been properly earned. A lot of what Fionna says she learned seems like she's just kind of randomly learned this off screen. Like the writers wanted her to end at this point, but kind of forgot to put in the character growth required to get her here. There is one thing that very much bugs me about this interaction though, and it's Fionna saying that Finn is the gut voice. I'm going to talk about this more later, but the fact that she is alluding to Finn somehow persuading or mind controlling or something her to implicate him in the murder of the Cosmic Owl should not have just been a really quick one-off throwaway line. I need more details on that because it is very, very important in how much Fionna is to blame for that situation. Anyway, Fionna gets back on her apology tour where she goes and sneaks into Gary's house and makes him something because she learned from his trauma that he wanted someone to make something for him. Now, I understand that this is supposed to be a sweet thing, but it does not work. If Fiona's supposed to have learned and is listening to her friends, I feel like breaking into their house and using their secret trauma that they haven't really told you about is not a good way to do that. Gary says that it's going to take some time, but for all intents and purposes, she is just forgiven. Then we see her saying something to Fennel. We don't get to actually hear what she's saying, but she says something to her which makes Fennel forgive her. I think that's a very lazy writing choice to say that Fionna just said some magic words and Fennel now forgives her. I understand that Fennel has this creepy stalker crush on Fionna, but it seems really weird that we don't even get to know what she could have possibly said. Is she like, yeah, sorry I kissed your boyfriend, I had trauma I was dealing with, and also he was really hot and I've been chasing him for a while, but, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. Oh, and no apologies to Hunter, by the way. Hunter's just cool with Fionna. After everything that's happened, they genuinely don't care. That is pretty crazy. I just simply don't buy that all of Fiona's friends would forgive her this easily. I don't think her apologies presented are good enough. Remember, the characters don't get to see what we see. They don't know that Fiona's been traumatized by the Winter King. They didn't see the conversation she had with Finn. It's just baffling that she thinks that climbing into someone's window and making them a really disgusting looking cake, saying some magic words, and no apology whatsoever is good enough to get these friends to like her again. And worse than that, I don't like Fionna. I don't think this did a good enough job redeeming her in my eyes. She did a lot of really bad things this season and should have actually had to work to make her friends forgive her. And the episode ends, other than the post-credit scene, with Fionna, Hunter, Cake, and Fennel discovering that there actually is an outside wall to the city, and beyond it is just endless sprawling nature, that the city has existed in its own bubble, and the rest of the world is just this beautiful, ooh-like land. And she realizes this because of the aliens that have been trying to give Ellis the message about this, for reasons I have no idea why. This ending is very weird. I don't know why it's here or what it's trying to tell me, other than the fact that I think the writers were also sick of being stuck inside this city, even though they spent so much time in it this season. Oh gosh, okay, this season is breaking me a little bit. Let's get on to the rating. It's a meh time. I applaud the episode for trying its best to salvage this season. And broadly speaking, it does hit a lot of the right notes for a solid finale. But at the same time, it is crushed by the fact that a lot of these storylines just aren't very good. I was fully expecting this finale to be an absolute disaster, a complete dumpster fire, and it's definitely not that. In a lot of ways, it feels like a satisfying ending to a season we didn't get. Somewhere out there in the multiverse, there is a series of 9 episodes before this that makes everything that happens here feel justified and correct. If Prismo had done more in the previous episodes, Marshall and Simone had a better ending to their storyline where they interacted more. Fionna didn't behave so awfully in episode 8. Huntress's seeds were mentioned elsewhere, and the Ooh crew didn't just exist to fail again and again. If all of these things were different in the previous 9 episodes, maybe this would have been a great conclusion to everything. But unfortunately, we got a very different season. And on that note, let's zoom out and take a look at each individual storyline as it exists throughout the season. We might as well start with Fionna. Fionna has a really interesting storyline this season. She is haunted by the events of Season 1's Winter King episode, where she fought and destroyed innocent Candy citizens who were brainwashed by the cruel king's projection of the crown. She's terrified of hurting innocent people, but feels like she's destined to. She pushes so hard to save the sweet spot because it represents her friend group and she wants to feel useful and wanted by them. She's also not cut out to have a normal job and do mundane city living tasks, especially when her mind is still stuck on the big multiverse adventure last season. She's like a soldier come home from war, unable to process the emotions and low stakes problems of civilian life, longing for bigger issues to solve. Additionally, she's romantically messed up by falling for the Winter King, then watching him decay to nothingness immediately after a kiss. She throws herself into the thematically opposite DJ Flame because he was a past relationship from before the trauma happened, so she feels safe with him even though he's flighty and dumped her via text. She'd rather chase after a past infatuation than look inward at why she's romantically all mixed up and struggling to move forward. Now that sounds like a pretty cool season of television, right? But the issue is, this is mostly subtext, things that we get brief glimpses of through a sometimes split-second image. If you forgot what happened in Season 1, like I did when I first watched the season, or if you're not paying close attention and really thinking about what's going on with Fionna, or you get distracted by all the other storylines going on and you can't really follow what's going on with her, all this Winter King drama is easy to miss, and Fionna then just looks like a raving lunatic chasing after someone who is obviously bad for her, for no discernible reason. Now maybe you're thinking, yeah, it's cool that a show is bold enough to not need to spell everything out, that this show stands tall and rewards those of us who care to look deeper into what we're watching. But here's the problem. The actual bulk of the season is just Fionna running around chasing after her sweaty ex and putting on a fundraiser. The surface level of her story is boring and dry. Despite the last 2 episodes being dedicated to making her realize her mistakes and trying to grow, she still refuses to talk about this trauma, so it never comes to a full head. It leaves this really interesting piece of her story unexplored and underdeveloped. And if I can't get interested in what the character is actually doing, why would I bother to care about the deeper motivations? DJ Flame is an utterly mind-numbingly nothing of a character. He runs his sweaty buns all over the place, is an aspiring DJ, and is a flirt who dumped Fionna over text. Even though we don't actually get to see why he dumped her. All we know is that Fionna says that things got too real for him, but she's also trying to cover for him, so I don't know if something worse is happening here, or if this is meant to just be taken at face value. And similarly, how much is Flame actually flirting with Fionna versus her reading too much into it? He clearly does have something for her, as he does reciprocate the kiss and tries to get back with her in the last episode, but the show does not want to make him out to be a monster. So honestly, a lot of the flirting between him and Fionna is left very vague as to if he's really interested or if it's just Fionna reading into things. We see bits of their past relationship in an episode, and it's just a run-of-the-mill boring looking relationship. In episode 3, Cake tells us that Flame is bad for Fionna, citing dumping via text, which we do know happened, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the downsides of their relationship. Was everything just completely fine until one day he said, I don't feel like doing this anymore? It's totally possible, but I don't know that that's what happened. Especially because if you look at Adventure Time, the highly controversial storyline that this is based on, Finn is 100% to blame for him and Flame Princess breaking up. And honestly, I don't even want to think about the equivalent in Fionna world to what happened between Finn and Flame Princess, because it would involve her coercing him into doing something with Simone. Anyway, my point is, for a story about them trying to get back together in some way, not seeing what actually caused them to break up, or what led up to it at the very least, seems like a missing piece that should be told to us. And there's so many things they could have done to make DJ Flame interesting. Flame Princess was physically dangerous to Finn and had wild mood swings and fiery rage, so DJ Flame could be some sort of risky, hothead bad boy. It would play into why Fiona's so attracted to him, and also show us on screen why he was so bad for her. Have him in deep with the mafia, make him a motorcycling adrenaline junkie, or a party machine that flakes as soon as there's any work to be done. Give me anything that makes this guy interesting. Honestly, I wish they would have made him a big cheating scumbag that's got like 5 girlfriends on the side and is highly manipulative and awful, because that would at least be something interesting. Instead, while he does share the kiss with Fionna and is flirting with her to some extent, he still gets forgiven for the most part and gets a happy ending. The show does not want us to see him as a villain. So much of Fiona's story this season is interacting with this guy, and it just means so little to me because he's so boring. Outside of Flame, Fionna also mentions in episode 7 that she thinks that everyone came out of the womb perfect and no one struggles in the way that she does. I think this is an absurd moral for an adult show to have. It's something that should be pretty obvious and feels more at home in a kid's show. And furthermore, she spends so much of her time around people who struggle constantly. Cake is always telling her about her problems. She knows about Marshall's issues with his mom. She knows that Gary is trying to make the sweet spot come together. Like, right in front of her is a bunch of people that are struggling, and she's too stupid to realize it. And Fionna spends most of the season acting horribly. She gets drunk and flirts with Hunter, is rude to Cake constantly, fraternizes with Marshall's mom behind his back, and then of course, she ruins the sweet spot. The last 2 episodes try to have her come face to face with the things that she's done, realizing that other people have problems and that she's messed up big time, but as I said in the last episode review, I don't think her apologies are sufficient. And then there's the worst thing that Fionna does all season. She accuses Finn of killing the cosmic owl, potentially dooming him to a lifetime in the pain vortex. Now, the last episode of the show gives us one quickly said line about Finn being the gut voice. But not only is it very easy to miss that line, it also just doesn't elaborate on something that is a major deal. Did Finn, like, take over her brain, or was this just a little bit of influence? And how does this even work? In a coma, he can somehow influence other universes' versions of himself? This is such an undercooked idea, and I don't know why they did it at all. It's not like Finn is pronounced guilty and there's some sort of effect to this. He gets accused and brought into the cosmic court, and then the owl is reborn and he gets returned right back to the U-Crew. So it really didn't have to be there. All it does is make Fionna look like a much worse person for attempting to kill Finn. Even if he was somehow influencing her, I still don't think that's a good enough reason for her to go off on him like this. And even if you are somehow satisfied with that one passing line in the finale, there's still almost 2 episodes in between then. Between the second half of episode 8, all of episode 9, and the first half of episode 10, you just have to sit there and think, wow, Fionna just did this of her free will. She really genuinely doesn't care about Finn and doesn't mind if she kills the boyfriend of the lady that she's been trying to allegedly help. A less dramatic thing that's going on with Fionna in this season is the fact that she can't hold down a job and she loses her apartment because she didn't pay the rent. According to an interview with Adam Mudo, one of the leading forces behind this show, this season wanted to tackle more real-world issues like paying rent, and do it in a way that was closer to life that they felt like they couldn't do in Adventure Time. This assertion that the show is going for realism is laughable. How can you bring up the issue of Fionna not being able to pay rent and then let her crash on the couch of another character who has no way of actually paying rent? How can you do that? It just doesn't make sense. You either don't bring this up at all and just let us guess at how the characters are affording anything, or if you're going to talk about money and make it a real issue, then it should be an issue for all the characters who don't have jobs, which is most of the characters in this show. It's very unsatisfying that Fionna's job problem and her apartment problem are not solved at the end of the season, unless you just assume that she's gonna go live in the wilderness, which may or may not be what they were implying. I went into this season liking Fionna, thinking she was a good character and enjoyable in season 1 and the Fionna and Cake episodes in Adventure Time. But holy cow, has my opinion of her sunk incredibly low by the end of this season. Her friends might be able to easily forgive her, but I sure won't. Her contribution to the season is a
Bad Venture Time.
Everything about her past episode 2 does not work. The stuff with DJ Flame sucks. Her not being able to pay rent or hold down a job is just completely unresolved. The Winter King trauma is barely actually touched on. And she seems to be a complete idiot who doesn't understand that other people have problems. Her heart-to-heart with Finn is a good start, but it doesn't redeem all of the horrible things that she's done, and I'm not even sure when or where or why she's had this revelation. Now for Cake the Cat. Cake's storyline is easily the most consistent in the whole season. A lot of it parallels Fionna's story in that she is seeking normalcy through chasing a man. While her pursuing Emkron is not the most interesting thing, he is a much more pleasant presence over Flame. And that's really only part of the story. Whereas Fionna never really wants to address or talk about her trauma with the Winter King or anything deeper going on with her, Cake talks about it all the time. And it all culminates with the best song of the season as the Karmic Worm helps her come to terms with who she really is. She also gets a lot of really cool moments. The horrors of giving birth to these disturbing children, pushing her powers to the limit to successfully complete the fundraiser for the Sweet Spot, turning into this crazy Hydra creature, and of course, the twist where she doesn't get with Emkron and something is just off about the kiss. But the best part about Cake's storyline and what makes it work so well is the fact that it intersects very nicely with so many other things going on in the season. She can have a story beat with Huntress about whether or not she should kill this butterfly, while Huntress's story in the tree is going on. We can see a brief glimpse of her dream during the dream episode. In the first episode, Fionna has to pick up something from the store, so naturally, Cake can spend a minute or two flirting with Emkron. These moments are all very natural. Cake gets to have a line or two that progresses her story or lets us know where her headspace is without taking away from the other characters' storylines that are going on. This is in sharp contrast to Marshall or the Ooh Crew, where we interrupt whatever was going on to cut to a very different location with very different characters doing something completely different from whatever it is we just saw. A show with this many storylines and this many focus characters needs to be smart and efficient with how it tells its stories. And the fact that Cake's stories get told to us without really even taking the focus away from anything else going on, it's wonderful. It works. And as a character, Cake is the best adapted of all of these Fionna World characters. The fact that she feels like Jake while still being very different from Jake is a huge success in my book. She comes across like a protective older sibling, just like Jake. And she also has an identity crisis. But hers is different from Jake's because his is about him being part alien, whereas Cake's is about the fact that Prismo turned her into this, even though the rest of the characters in Fiona Land are all normies. She lived as a basic cat in a way that Jake never did as a dog. And really, she's the best character in this season. She's adapted well, she's funny, her shape-changing abilities bring a little bit of magic and fun to this really boring world. She works well as a supporting character in other characters' storylines. She's able to sneak her own little arc in there even when it's not about her. Her story is a good time, even though it is held back a little bit by Fiona World having so many different other fantasy elements. Huntress's story. Generally speaking, if she's not the focus of an episode, they really don't know what to do with her. Sometimes she's having big fight scenes and doing cool magic stuff, and then other times she's stuck as a seed or awkwardly just standing there while Fiona's story is going on. So the idea behind her storyline is that she needs to learn to be part of a community, to work with others and not just see them as tools, to not just do what's best for her, but what's best for everyone. The problem is that the show doesn't really develop that idea slowly across the season. It's more one episode she bullies Hunter, and the next she begrudgingly asks for help. Her big realization with Fionna and Cake is that they both took care of her by literally carrying her at different points in the season. But truthfully, she doesn't actually have much of a connection with either. Cake gets trapped on her arm for one story, which is a good start, but then the two don't really interact all that much the rest of the season. Fiona and Huntress both hunt down the owl, but Fiona's paired more with Finn in that episode than she is with Huntress. And in the courtroom, Huntress has a muzzle on her mouth part of the time, and Fiona is actively trying to throw her boyfriend under the bus. Episode 9 does a lot of heavy lifting in trying to make it seem like these three characters have formed a bond. It's as if they've been going on adventures all season long, and she's slowly been warming up to them, and here's the big moment where she finally accepts them. That's what this scene feels like, but that's not what happens in the season. It just doesn't feel earned, especially because at this point in the story, Huntress has no idea if Finn is even still out there and alive. For all she knows, Fiona actually got him killed during the Cosmic Court incident. And then even in the finale, I feel like they really squandered all of the chances to show that Huntress has grown. She does call out to Fiona for help, and that's a start, but she doesn't actually have to work with anyone to save Finn other than herself. And it's nice and all that she becomes a teacher, but they really are just repeating what they did with Simon in this very season. And it also strikes me as disappointing that she really only gets one or two cute moments with Finn in the entirety of the season. We get a lot of wrap up in Fiona World in episode 10, but we really should have seen a little bit more of Huntress and Finn interacting. But on the other hand, Huntress is responsible and a key player in the coolest, best parts of this season. The time tree, the cosmic owl hunt, the fight scenes with Witch Wizard. If Fiona's storyline is bad and Cake's storyline is good, I think Huntress deserves to be in the meh category. And one last thing I have to mention about her is the fact that they did kind of change her character from Adventure Time. Rewatching Flute Spell and The Wild Hunt, it's pretty clear that she's someone that just doesn't really have a lot of social skills. Not so much that she's such a loner that she doesn't know how to work with anyone else ever. It's not that this version of Huntress is incompatible with the younger version of her, because it is very possible this is just who she became as she got older, and the characters aren't completely different, but I will say I do like the way she speaks and acts in Adventure Time a bit more than how she is in Fionna and Cake. Not that she's bad in F&C, but she feels more unique and interesting back then, whereas now she seems like the type of character that you would see in basically any show that has a warrior that's quiet and needs to learn how to express themselves. Next up, the Sweet Spot storyline. This one is unique in that it's a story that affects all of the characters. Well, except for the ones from Ooh. But everyone else comes together to contribute in some way to making this thing happen. Early on, I really liked the setup for this, showing us why these characters care so much about this. And I like that in the first 3 episodes, we do get these scenes of all the characters coming together to brainstorm what they're going to do. It's just a shame that once DJ Flame enters the picture, Fiona's focus goes way off track and the Sweet Spot takes a backseat to chasing after that guy. Honestly, I would argue that nothing interesting happens in the Sweet Spot storyline after episode 2 until episode 8, the big finale of that storyline. Like, in the middle, it's just a bunch of shopping for ingredients to do the bake sale with, trying to secure a venue, and figuring out whether or not Marshall is actually going to be a part of this. And it's just not that interesting, especially because they find a venue, and then they lose the venue, and then they find a new venue immediately. They just needed to make it more interesting. Perhaps the characters could have gone out and scouted scouted more talent to perform. Maybe they could have done a dress rehearsal where everything goes wrong. Perhaps some more drama could arise with Queenie. I'm not really sure what it needs, but it definitely needs something. As far as the ending of the storyline, I do think it's great that it finishes before the end of the season. So it's definitely not dragged out as much as it could have been. But on the other hand, a complaint I have is the fact that Gary really doesn't do too much to make his dream come true. All he does is a bake sale, the thing that he's basically been doing this entire time to raise money for his dreams. Like, I understand that it's supposed to be like Finn is with Princess Bubblegum, how he's her knight, and so Fiona is the one that's actually going out there and doing things for the equivalent of the Candy Kingdom, which is the sweet spot. But even still, I feel like Gary doesn't get anything to do this season, and he should have been a little bit more instrumental in saving this plot of land, because he is the one that has the most to lose here. And speaking of missed opportunities, I really hate the fact that Huntress is not involved in the sweet spot at all. Her whole story is about how she needs to work together with other people and find her community, and what better way to show that she's learning how to do that than working together with all these other people to save a community area that she won't even really see much benefit from, if any at all. But the real issue with this storyline, the big problem, is just the fact that no matter how important it is to these Fiona World characters, this will never seem as big or impactful as the story of Finn the human possibly dying. I'm not saying I don't care about the sweet spot, I'm just saying it doesn't really mean that much to me compared to this beloved character being on death's door. It feels like we're comparing a cheesy 80s sitcom about putting on a show to save the community center versus a character dying slowly of a poison and everyone frantically scrambling to try to save him. It just doesn't add up tonally. All said and done, I think it's a meh storyline. And the reason I have these expectations and want more out of this is because it is the big storyline happening in Fiona World. It's the one thing that actually unites these characters. And outside of what's going on with Finn, it's the driving force behind the first 2 episodes of the show. It's not that what we got was bad, it's just that for being such a core component of this season, it really needed to be better. Now let's talk about the Ooh crew. Simon, Marceline, and Bubblegum. The main characters from Adventure Time that appear in most episodes of the season, but don't end up actually doing all that much. In the first 2 episodes, Simon gets to have phone calls with Fiona, and he scrambles to get Finn to the Candy Kingdom after Huntress drops him in his lap. Then the trio spends episode 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10 trying to save Finn in ways that fail immediately. And yet not much actually happens other than when they turn Finn old. You could easily take over 90% of what these characters do and remove it from the season and literally nothing changes. Another thing I hate is that these attempts to save Finn don't actually have stories. It's basically just, let's try this idea. Oh, it didn't work. That's the extent of what they get to do. There's no journey to some desolate mountain in order to find a rare cure that might have a chance at working. There's no villain stealing Finn's body while he's incapacitated and these characters have to go and rescue his physical form. No, those would actually be stories. The only purpose they seem to have is to constantly remind us that Finn is still dying. And that's actually a problem, because what's happening in Fiona World has significantly lower stakes than this. We're talking about saving a guy's business and a plot of land. We're talking about Fiona trying to rekindle her love with her ex. These stories come across as less interesting because we are constantly being reminded that Finn is dying. In my opinion, once Huntress smashes that phone in episode 4, we should stop hearing from these characters. Some actual distance would make when they eventually do reappear feel more impactful. Not knowing what's going on with Finn is actually more interesting than constantly cutting to him with characters saying over and over again, "Oh no, what are we gonna do?" If you're not going to do anything with these legacy characters, they just shouldn't be in it, or at least they shouldn't be in it as much as they are. Please don't just drag these characters out to have them stand in the corner and fail again and again. Let them be the heroes that we know they are, or get them out of here. I don't know if this is what happened, but it feels like the people behind the show just didn't have enough faith in their newer characters and storylines going on in Fiona World. So we get Bubbline and Simon Simon and Finn thrown in our faces over and over again, reminding us that they're here too and that, oh my gosh, you should keep tuning in because what's gonna happen with Finn? But these characters aren't allowed to do anything. They're not the main characters. They're not the ones that get to save Finn. Yet they also don't get to interact with the main characters that much. So what is the point? And it's frustrating too because you could see a good idea in here. If this was original Adventure Time and Finn had been poisoned and this was an episode of all the characters standing around trying to figure out ways to bring him back to life, that would actually be really interesting. It'd be like What Was Missing or Time Sandwich, where everyone comes around and tries their own ideas and people get mad at each other because they don't work and tensions run high. Like, that has made for some great episodes, but just drip feeding us this story of, how about the princesses kiss him back to life? Nope, no, that didn't work. How about Prismo wishes him back to life? Nope, he doesn't have powers. How about the wishing eye wishes him back to life? No, that just didn't work either. Well, let's bite him and turn him into a vampire. Nope, that didn't work. Let's try to find the heart of the forest. Nope, the heart's dead. It's not an engaging way to tell a story, and they feel like such an afterthought, considering at the end of the season, Finn doesn't even interact with any of these characters. They are there when he comes back, they celebrate that he's back, but they don't give him a group hug. He doesn't thank them individually. There is no dialogue exchange between Finn and any of these three characters anywhere in the season. This storyline is very much a
Bad Adventure Time.
If you were to tell me that Simon, Marceline, and Bubblegum were originally only going to be in 1 or 2 episodes and all the rest of what happens with them was added at the very last minute because producers got cold feet about the show not having them featured in it, I would believe you, because all of it's written as if these characters are off in a far distant corner doing their own thing, way away from everyone else. They're not allowed to affect anything. They're not allowed to talk with anyone for any extended period of time. They are just in a glass box over here, and every so often we point to them and say, hey, remember those characters? That's what this feels like. What an absolute waste of great characters. Marshall Lee's storyline. Oh boy, this one really hurts. So much of this storyline happens off screen. We don't get to see the restraining order get issued, Marshall's mom's reaction to finding out about the ice cream lady, Marshall's last meeting with her. In fact, we don't get to see most of the time that Marshall spent with her. We only ever get to see one encounter between the two of them, which leads me to really question how long they were even friends for. Simone is barely a character. She gets very little screen time, and a fraction of that is in the present day. Also, I love Grey Griffin as a voice actress, but the voice she uses for this character is basically her default background character voice. It does not help Simone stand out, and we never get to see anything from Simone's perspective. In fact, I'm not even sure what the equivalent of the Ice King is in Fiona World. Another problem is that Marshall is so passive in this storyline. This guy barely does a single thing other than stand there and get berated by his mom in the past. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only reason he reconnected with Simone is because she walked into his line of sight. He made no effort at all to actually find her and try to figure out the situation. Nor does he try to confront his mom or get back at her or do anything. Season 1 gave off the vibe that he didn't like his mom, but he was going along with what she said in order to help Gary's career. But in Season 2, apparently it's not that. It's that Marshall is literally so pathetic and weak around her that he can't stand up to her at all. And then there's the repetition of it all. We get 3 phone calls from his mom where nothing happens. We also see 3 instances in separate episodes of him in the past getting berated by his mother. How is there so much repetition in a storyline that is only a few minutes out of a 10-episode long season? Another issue is that this storyline is so strangely disconnected from all the other characters and stories going on in the season. While it does overlap with the sweet spot with him quitting the event after finding out about the restraining order, otherwise it's bafflingly in its own corner. I get it, Marshall doesn't want to talk about his issues, just like Fiona. No one wants to talk about their issues in this season. All we can do is just allude to them vaguely. But these characters not wanting to talk to each other about their problems doesn't make for an interesting story. And it doesn't explain why it's still so separate at the end of the season after Marshall and Simone are friends again. Could we at least get a scene in the epilogue of her meeting everyone else? Fiona grew really close with Simon. Wouldn't she want to meet the Fiona World version of him? And if she's so important in Marshall's life, wouldn't he want to introduce her to Gary? And lastly, and this is the biggest problem for me, this whole thing is an absolute failure of an adaptation of Adventure Time. Marceline's story is highly tied up with magic and monsters and mushroom wars, so transposing that to Fionna World City could actually be interesting. How do you adapt zombies and magic crowns and vampire kids in a world of normies? The answer is, you don't really. You just tell the most basic, bare bones version of that story. Abadir is no longer an evil demon who rules a realm and sucks souls. He's now become a wealthy, run-of-the-mill, abusive parent who wants their kid to be seen and not heard. Simon is no longer a man tortured by temptation to wield a powerful device to protect his adopted daughter at the cost of losing her and his humanity. He's just a nice lady in the park who sells ice cream and played music with Marshall. Look back at the original version of Marshall Lee from Bad Little Boy. This guy was tough, cool, edgy, and was not afraid to play really mean jokes on his friends, which was a really solid adaptation of Marceline, especially in those early seasons. And season 1 of Fionna and Cake at least a little bit understood this. He laughs when there's chaos with Cake and Fionna on the bus. He doesn't try to help her. He also refuses to help Fionna with the rent situation with his mom, as well as offering dodgy advice of going to Ellis to get her cat looked at. And no disrespect to the new voice actor who does a fine job, but Donald Glover just radiates cool. Anything would have been a downgrade. But going from original Marceline to Bad Little Boy Marshall Lee to season 1, then down to season 2, it has just been a complete slide of his character to the point where in season 2, there is not an ounce of mystery or edge or rebellious prankster spirit. There is zero friction in his relationship with Gary because he has been turned into such a soft boy himself that they're almost the same character, which misses the entire appeal of Bubblegum and Marceline? Okay, so beyond Marshall as a character, the actual storyline here is a combination of the story between Simon and Marcy, as well as Marceline's relationship with her father. And I like the idea of that, because Simon and Hudson actually never share any screen time, despite both of them basically being Marceline's dad. Apparently, Ice Simon found Hudson and sent him to take care of Marceline after he gets too crazy to take care of her, but we never see that on screen. So combining these two storylines that are very important to Marceline's character is actually a really good idea. It's just a shame that this show botches it up so hard that yet again we don't have Simone and Hannah in the same place. They may or may not have interacted, or it might have all been done through Hannah's minion. It's unclear because it's all off screen. Now, the show could have used the more mature age rating and closer to reality setting to actually give us something very real and heartbreaking, to not hide any punches behind being a silly fantasy show that couldn't literally happen. Instead of making a magical crown be the thing that makes Simon lose it, you could make it be a traumatic head injury or Alzheimer's or even just a vague brain disorder. Give us the heartbreak of Marshall seeing her in a hospital bed with her not recognizing him. Paint a picture of his mom being a more complex but ultimately bad mother. Make these characters feel more tragic and closer to reality than Adventure Time ever could. But no, they don't do that. This is an unserious story about an ice cream lady giving this kid free ice cream and Marshall's mom being comedically evil. It has zero of the emotional weight or tragedy that Simon and Marcy's story did in Adventure Time. That story means a lot to me. It is my favorite storyline in the original show. And to have them take it and squish it down into this nothingness of a story, it hurts, man. I wish that they could have done a better job with this, because I think a truer to life adaptation could have been really interesting. Marshall's storyline gets a super
Bad Adventure Time.
There is nothing redeeming here. At long last, it is time to rate this thing. So we had 4 good episodes, 1 meh episode, and 5
Bad Adventure Times.
Then adding in the storylines, you have 1 good storyline, 2 meh storylines, and 3
Bad Adventure
storylines. While there ended up being more good episodes than I was really expecting, half of them came at the beginning of the season. And it's great that the setup itself is good, but unfortunately, good setup is ultimately hurt by bad payoff. When rewatching the season, I don't get that much enjoyment out of these first 2 episodes because I know that it's downhill from here. Part of what makes those episodes good is that it sets up a promise, but then the rest of the season doesn't keep it. Then there's the bird and the clock. The fact that the most exciting thing that happens all season, the cosmic owl dying, gets effectively undone 3 episodes later, definitely makes it less exciting. And as I said in the review, episode 9 is good, but it doesn't feel like the things in it were earned. The more you take into account the season as a whole, the worse these 4 good episodes actually get. Plus the fact that there's only one good storyline, and Fiona's, the main character of the show, the one that arguably gets the most focus, is a flaming disaster. I think it's pretty clear this is a
Bad Venture Season.
So what went wrong here? Well, there's a lot. And watching this show, even for the first time, I could tell there's just something off about it, even if it took analyzing it to really figure out what's going on. I think first and foremost, there's just a structure issue here. We spend so many episodes cutting around from storyline to storyline, and it doesn't feel motivated. I mentioned the wonderful transitions they use in the first episode, and they do use them sometimes in other episodes, but it doesn't feel natural switching from to Fiona World, to what's going on with Marshall, to what's going on with Huntress, to what's going on with Cake. It just does not flow in a way that feels natural and satisfying, and part of it is because there's too many storylines. Another major problem is that these characters just don't interact with each other that much. Gary calls Fiona his best friend and his hero, and yet he barely talks to her in the entire season. And there's the fact that we have all these characters in OO that barely interact with anyone else. And even the characters that do interact with each other, it's brief and not exciting. Hunter and Huntress could have been an interesting pairing, but they barely spend any time together. And perhaps the most egregious of them all, the fact that Simone doesn't interact on screen with anyone other than Marshall in the entire season, unless you count the pre-rebooted Ice Queen. We do get these group scenes at the beginning of the season, but that quickly tapers off. And at the Sweet Spot event, it is a major plot point that Fiona and Huntress are simply not there for most of it. I don't think I would notice or care as much if it weren't for the fact that a lot of this season is character driven. It's not as much about comedy or fantasy or adventure. It's about relationships, and I think a big part of that is people interacting. Call me crazy, but I feel like there should be maybe a little bit more of that. Then there's the repetition of it. The fact that Fiona and DJ Flame talk in episode 3, and then they meet up and talk in episode 4, and then they meet up and talk in episode 5, and then they meet up and talk in episode 6. Huntress is looking for the heart of the forest. Is it here? Is it here? Is it here? And I think I've harped on that long enough with the OO crew, as well as Marshall's storyline, which consists of many scenes of his mom berating him as a child, him ignoring her phone calls, and the bodyguard lurking in the background. There was only 10 episodes to fill, so I don't know why so many things repeat themselves. And it's surprising there's so much repetition because this season was trying to be way too ambitious. Trying to touch on so many storylines in each episode brings down the enjoyment of the episodes. It feels like we're not progressing the story enough because we keep cutting away from character to character. I hate when people use this comparison, but I am going to say it, there are times when the season feels like it was made for people that are addicted to TikTok and don't have attention spans past 20-second scenes. This season tried to do a low-stakes sitcom drama and also high-energy anime-esque fight scenes. It tried to follow up threads from last season and sow seeds for future projects. It uses extensive flashbacks, has tons of cameos, trying to tell these big season-long story arcs. It also trying to have social commentary and adapt old Adventure Time stories, and it has multiple focus characters spread across different universes. It tries to send the protagonist down a dark road and then redeem her, and tackle complex trauma, and have specially animated opening sequences. It was all too much for one season. Ironically, if this had been Adventure Time, and this had been 20 11-minute episodes instead of 10 half hours, I actually think you could have maybe covered all of this, provided that each episode only focused on one storyline and one idea. At the end of the day, I think that something clearly went wrong in the making of this show. Either the scope got away from the people making it, or perhaps there was a big clash in the writer's room about what the focus of the season should be. Maybe some people wanted it to be more classic Adventure Time, and some people wanted it to be just relationship drama, and they could never figure out a balance. Or maybe the budget was slashed and the time was crunched, and there just wasn't enough time to really think all of these things through, and they wrote a first draft and just went with it. I just kind of have to believe that there was something that happened, because there are a lot of really talented people behind this show, and these problems are pretty foundational. But for whatever the reason, Fiona and Cake Season 2 is one of the worst seasons in the entire franchise. I do do think the season would have been better if they had just done chill sitcom level problems with Fionna and Cake. Not including Ooh at all. No Finn dying, no Huntress Wizard, no PB and Marcy standing around, none of that. Just tell stories about saving plots of land and paying rent and things like that. Is that the kind of show that I would want? No, not really, especially not from Adventure Time, but at least I would respect that a little more. At least that would be focused, and it would be something that I could look at and say, well, okay, it's a genre that I'm not crazy about, but it works for what it is. Wedging glimpses of actual Adventure Time goodness in between these sitcom level stories just makes this thing a rough viewing experience. I always want more of that, and I'm constantly being ripped away from it. Unfortunately, the future of Adventure Time is really up in the air right now with this Paramount merger looming overhead. We do know that side quests will be coming out, and there might be a BMO preschool show, and there also maybe will be a movie, but I don't know if Fionna and Cake will get a season 3. And to be completely honest, I don't know that it should get a season 3. I do want to see more from the more mature side of Adventure Time, but I'm just not sure Fionna and Cake is actually the right conduit. When you get down to it, what is even the point of this show? The original conceit of Fionna and Cake was seeing what these characters were like if they were gender swapped and a little bit older. Now that Finn is older, that age thing literally doesn't matter anymore. And as far as the gender swap, it feels like the novelty of that has worn off, and I also think they're a little bit afraid of actually doing anything there because it might come across as sexist or problematic or offending someone. Like, no matter what they do, what direction, what they say, if they say anything at all about gender, they're gonna catch some flack from someone. So I feel like they just sidestepped it all. Like, nothing about Fionna being a woman versus Finn actually affects anything about her character. Okay, so then season 1 of Fionna and Cake gave us the fact that they live in a city and everyone's a human and everything is very, like, down to earth and normified. But that is super out the window because of aliens and tanks and this whole city being in a little bubble and the rest of the world is this big sprawling nature that nobody realized. So really, what does this show actually have to offer other than giving us blander versions of characters and storylines that they've already done on Adventure Time? Also, from a world-building perspective, I think Fionna World is very strange. Why is it that characters like Ellis and the Lemon Carbs are exactly like their Ooh counterparts, yet characters like Flame only share a motif and not that much else? Then there's Queenie, who acts nothing at all like the King of Ooh. Like, he is a con man that specifically lies to your face, whereas Queenie will just out and out tell you that she hates you and runs a legitimate business. And BMO is still stuck as an alarm clock, and I guess Jermaine is a normal cat, even though Cake is now a humanoid cat. The world building worked in season 1, but the more I'm in Fionna World, the more I question the logistics of how any of this works. Give me a show about PB and Marcy, or just a continuation of Adventure Time in a more straightforward way would be completely fine. It looks like from this season, some of the writers did want to give us a continuation of Adventure Time and focus more on those older legacy characters. But for as long as they have to contend with Fionna and Cake and all these other normified versions, they're never gonna get that much focus as we've seen here. And I'm of the opinion that I would rather just see Adventure Time end than see it continue on in a form that just sucks. But I don't want to end on a complete downer, so I will say, if you are interested in Adventure Time, especially earlier Adventure Time, I highly recommend checking out The Elephant. It's a special that Adult Swim put out last year that's currently for free on YouTube right now, that was made by a bunch of Adventure Time people, including Kent Osborne, Ian Jones-Cordy, Pat McHale, Rebecca Sugar, Pendleton Ward, and ironically, it stars the original voice of Huntress Wizard, Maria Banford. It's a really fun experimental thing that I think captures the spirit of early Adventure Time really well. So please go and check that out. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching all of this. This season of television made me feel so strongly that I decided to come out of retirement and make videos again, because I felt passionate about trying to figure out what was actually wrong here. Thank you to all of my channel members, especially those of you in the upper crust who got to see this video and all upcoming videos a week early and help me catch errors. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of Fionna and Cake Season 2, and let me know what other show I should give the every episode reviewed treatment. And with that, Pie Guy, out.